So I think we talk about overlays a lot. You should use them or not use them. And I thought this was interesting because they're trying now to put forth actual research into whether they work. And so I saw that people were posting about this study, talking about the effectiveness of overlays. So I thought it would be good to look at the study. It is a master's thesis for Daniela Kubesh. She's in a Master's of Science program and she's in Germany. And you can read the original article yourself, which I would recommend. She
Mm.
also gave a keynote speech, which is in German, so you have to have the auto translate on
Oh,
YouTube
okay.
to get it in English, the subtitles in English. And then she also posted her slides, and I did not listen to the podcast episode, but it is in German. So I don't know if there's a way to translate that, but so I thought it was interesting because I had been seeing people post about it, about whether it was a debate, should we be using these overlays or not? And most people in the disability community have been very vocal against overlays as a solution that doesn't quite work.
Yeah.
And especially doesn't quite work for people who are visually impaired and blind. So she did this research where she wanted to look at overlays through a scientific lens. And this is her information if you want to look her up. She's an accessibility engineer. And she designed the study where you would have, she chose websites where there's a technical evaluation using, like looking at the websites, studying them against WCAG 2.1 AA standard, and then coming up with inclusion exclusion criteria to bring in participants into her study. And in the end, she had 21 individuals who had permanent visual impairments participate. So it is a small study. So that is something we probably need more studies where there are larger sizes of participants. And it isn't fully randomized either because they were trying to get full interviews of the people's experience. Expert interviews, two consultants and two company representatives conducted those interviews. So it's good for you to look more closely at the methods of the paper and decide what you think of their methods too when evaluating the results. And her thesis basically was that in their current state, accessibility overlays do not deliver on the promises and are what she called a disability dongle. I think what she meant by this term, because I've never heard this term before, but I think what she meant by it was essentially that it's something that's held out to the disability community that they're trying to do something, but honestly, it doesn't really do what it's meant to do. But people who do have disability impairments, despite the trouble with them, still are optimistic that they can be helpful in the future. They just need to be improved. And just to go through how she got to these 21 people, her inclusion exclusion criteria, she needed people that were who regularly use the internet, were used to browsing the internet, and then had a kind of sense of what they thought was good user experience for themselves. They didn't have to have prior knowledge on what an accessibility overlay is, and they didn't even need to have heard of them. So there were actually people that had not heard of them really or had never, and they didn't have to have used them either. They had to be 18 because of legal reasons. They had to be adults, and they could be fluent in English or German. The study itself was conducted in either English or German, depending on the chosen language of the person. And they also changed the language of the website overlays, interview questions into the language that was chosen by the participant. They couldn't have a visual impairment that could be corrected to normal, and they had to have permanent visual impairment. So not something temporary, something permanent. And they were able to have impairments that are other than visual impairments, but the study itself was focused on people with visual impairments. They had to have their own device to access the internet because it would create a more realistic user experience for them to use their own devices. And if they used access technology, they could use the tool that they were familiar with and knew how to operate. They had to be able to participate online. They had to be able to join video calls and share their screens so that the author could make observations of them during the study. And they also needed to be available during the time frame of the study. So those were the inclusion exclusion criteria for the study itself. And looking at the people that participated, a majority of them had their visual impairments for their entire lives. So over 50%, but some did not have the visual impairment all their lives. So some had it for fairly lengthy periods of their lives, but others, there were two that had only had visual impairments for 2 to 5 years. So about 10%. In terms of what access technology they were using, the majority of people were using JAWS. Some used NVDA. So these are the kind of the more popular ones that most people use. And then VoiceOver is what's used typically by people who might use a Mac. And I'm not that familiar with Fusion, but two of them used Fusion. And if they had no idea what an accessibility overlay, they didn't know what it was, never heard of them, it was explained to them that an accessibility overlay is a special software placed over a website by the website operator that makes it more accessible to people with impairments. It adds additional features such as reading text aloud, enlarging content, adjusting color contrast, and keyboard controls to make it easier to use. And by using an accessibility overlay, people with visual, hearing, motor impairments can better understand and interact with the content. So that's how it was defined to them what it is, since some of them were actually unfamiliar with overlays. And these are just examples of what they considered overlays. So some of them may be familiar in terms of the brand or whatever you may be familiar. And then this is just to show how the accessibility overlays tend to sit in the corner of a website and they tend to need to be activated. They will typically be on the lower left or the lower right, and they often have some sort of symbol on them to identify them. So in this case, a stick figure is used to identify it. And they did look at several different overlays as the ones to be using in the study. And this was just a comparison chart where they looked at the different features, how long the trial was, how it was installed, how many languages were supported, and what compliance standards the overlay was said to help with. And they did eventually choose to work with UserWay, Accessibility, and Audio Eye, which again are the three most popular and well known, I think, of the overlays out there. And they show like the pricing and things like that. Until looking at this chart, I really wasn't as familiar with how many languages they support, but you could see that UserWay supports the most languages of them, which is 55, while Audio Eye only supports 6 languages. So there's a wide range of language support for these accessibility overlays. And they basically took a website that was for a music festival. This just shows it really didn't matter what festival it was, so they did redact some of that information. But this is what the homepage is like, where you have a large image that takes over the screen. They have the name of the festival here. The menu is actually on the right side with the social media, which is a little unusual for websites. And then they have the cookie banner. And to test them, they gave the participants 4 tasks to complete. And the first task was, are they able to interact with the overlay and make adaptations to their devices? They're using a screen reader device to make the website itself accessible and usable to them. So are they able to properly use the website? Are they able to interact with and activate the overlay? So that's the first task. The second task was to go to an artist profile, because it is for a music festival, and listen to an excerpt of the performance. So the purpose of that was to show whether they can interact with various content types on the website, such as audio, searching for something, and use the menu. The third task was to go to a press photo from the press page to describe its content and assess whether they could use the download button to get an image, and also examine whether the alternative text for images was available and whether it conveyed the appropriate meaning. And the fourth task was for users to display only specific posts on the news page to investigate their interaction with the website and content types like filtering. So filtering option in menu. So those were the 4 tasks. And then the 21 participants were randomized to use each of these to look at the website without an overlay, to look at the website with Audio Eye, with UserWay, with Accessibility, And they were randomized in a way so that not every participant was looking at the same website with the same overlay at the same time. That's how they were randomized. So they would go from T5, for example, would start with no overlay, then they would go to UserWay, then they would go to Accessibility, then they would do AudioEye. And so they could try to see whether these overlays, there was a difference between the types of overlays used, whether their usability was improved or worsened using or not using the various overlays, and comparing it against their use of the website that didn't have an overlay. And so, in addition to just collecting metrics, did they complete the tasks? How long did it take them to complete the tasks and other observations? Then they were also interviewed to gather additional data about their experience, and they used the Accessibility User Survey, which was a survey created by Fable 45 and it's licensed under Creative Commons and an international license 46. So it's something free you can use that you can use to as a survey to assess their user experience. Typically, from a previous study of the use of this survey, where they looked at over 2,000 sessions, the average score tends to be 65. So you want to be higher than 65 to note that it's a decent user experience for the person. And there were three things they were looking at. And the first is that you don't want to prioritize some user experiences over the deterioration of other people's user experiences. And so when they first did the technical evaluation, they looked at how many violations are on this website and with regards to WCAG 2.1a and AA violations. So they found the website itself had 26 violations, and then the -2 meant using overlays, depending on the overlay, could fix two of those violations, and some of the overlays actually increased the number of violations, so actually added violations. So that's the sort of the average of what they found. So the website had 26 violations. Some overlays made it worse by 2, and some overlays made it better by 2. And just to let you know, when the slide has this kind of tan background, I'm taking this from her keynote presentation. But I
Okay.
went to her paper and I went to look at some of the things that were in her paper that go into a little bit more detail. So there's a table in her paper that talks about this more detailed. So where you could see no overlay 26, and you could see how many were level A and how many were level AA, so you can kind of look more detailed exactly. And the one that, so UserWay and Accessibility improved, AudioEye didn't really change it, actually. And then they also went through and put all of the websites with and without the overlays through common automated accessibility tools for their technical evaluation. So they looked at it through Wave, which is WebAIM. They looked at it through Axe, which is DeQ, and they looked at it through Google Lighthouse. So without overlays, there were 56 Wave alerts, and the reason there are two numbers here is because Wave has a reputation for actually creating false positives and negatives. So sometimes it overreads things as errors. So that's why there are two numbers presented. So sometimes Wave will, and that is a criticism from the disability community sometimes, is that people will focus on the numbers instead of the actual usability, that it doesn't sometimes matter whether you see all these coding errors. And also just some of the things it finds are overreading errors. So that is one thing that was interesting to read about Wave and WebAIM. So with no overlay, it's really 45 alerts. Axe found 7, Lighthouse found 4, and the Lighthouse scores were 98% without an overlay. That's how it read it. So even though there are errors, Lighthouse is still giving it a 98%, which you would consider over 90 to be pretty good for Google Lighthouse. And then they ran it with the different overlays here, and then they looked at what is the scoring they were getting. And basically, there was very little change, I guess I would say. Maybe Accessibility had more issues because the score drops to 88 here. But in general, like 56 to 55, it's probably not really a significant difference. And again, Lighthouse scored it user way better at the end with the use of user way. So I would want to look more closely at her tables and spend more time looking at her data. This is the gestalt of what she presented, was that overall there were 26 violations of the WCAG, and in general, two things were improved and two things were made worse. But I think it would be good to spend more time with her study and look at her actual tables and study them more closely. And what were the violations that were really noticed? So one of the things that this website, starting out from the beginning, which, was a design choice that probably shouldn't have been made, was that the menus are here on the right side. So this is an element order issue where you basically have to go through all of this content before you get to the menu for someone using a screen reader. So when the menu is activated, it's going to slide in from the right. It's interesting looking, I think, from a design. Like if you were looking at this from design, it's something that would stand out because it's different than other websites, that the menu slides out from the right instead of the left, and that the menu's on the right instead of the left. But when you break convention, you do have to consider that you're doing something that's against what people are used to doing normally. And that can be a problem for people to have something not expected. And again, for screen readers, that means they have to go through all this other stuff to get to the menu before they get to the menu because it's on the other side. So that off the bat could have been designed better just by being just more conventional. So starting out, this website has a design issue that they're trying to stand out, maybe from other music festival websites, but that decision to do that means that you're doing something that people aren't expecting, and that could be a bad thing for people who have disabilities or just having other expectations when they come to a website. So that was one of the issues. So the menu, whether they could access the menu was an issue for some of these people that were in the study because it was not in an expected place. And then they have to be able to toggle the menu, turn it on, and then select one of the drop-down links. And another issue that was found was what they called illogical headings. So for some reason, the overlays tended to take any text that was bold and turn it into a header. And that created confusion for some people using a screen reader. Because, of course, logical heading order is one of the things that you want to have on your website, that you have H1 followed by H2 followed by H3 followed by H4, that we know that the hierarchy of information, H1 is most important, H6 is least important, and then when it suddenly sticks in H3 somewhere in the middle, that can be confusing. So it was taking any sort of bolded text and calling it a header. So that was one of the violations that was created. And then this also shows what happened. So this is the page with the overlays off, where again you have the H1s, you have the H2s, and then if you turn the overlay on, it suddenly turned this into an H4. The H2s became H3s. There are H4s because of the bolded text in the middle of the paragraph. There are H4s over here. The cookie banner text, which isn't really, I guess maybe it's slightly bolded because it's white over red, becomes an H4. And so the headings become out of order, and that can create confusion for someone using a screen reader. And so one of the participants made a comment that, for some things that the overlays improved, so just because she's saying just because these elements are made quote unquote accessible doesn't mean it's optimal. If she has 1,000 headings, then she can't really figure out what's a good overview of what's going on in the site. It's hard for her. This issue with all the headers that happen. And then the other errors that were common or stood out is the image description. So this was one of the images on the website, and the overlays will often automate the creation of alt text. And so the alt text that was automatically created for this image was a close-up of a cat's face. which is clearly not what the image is of, which is it's an image of an ear with sound waves coming out because it's a music festival website. So it's about audio, sound. And unfortunately, the alt text was a close-up of a cat's face. And then another image where, again, you have people in a room with musical instruments ended up just being a group of people in a room, which is not descriptive enough. It's not wrong, but it's just not descriptive enough. And it would have been helpful to know that it's people in a room with instruments on a musical website. And this is alt text generation by AI is definitely getting better. But the issue with overlays is it's being done automatically. So you're not going there to double check what it's doing. It's just going to throw out, it's going to look at an image, it's going to create the alternative text, and it's going to serve it to your customers. And you're not really curating that. So when I'm using, we've talked a lot about alt text AI as a decent alt AI alt text generator, but I put images in there and I look at the alt text it generates, and then I edit that alt text and then I add it to my image. Like I'm not just automatically posting it anywhere, although that is a feature of it. You can now attach it to a website and it can auto create alt text. I don't really recommend that yet because I think you still need to take ownership of what is being produced by these AI generated outputs and look at them. And it's pretty good. It's definitely better than it was 3 years ago, but it's still not completely error free. I just put an image into alt text AI yesterday, and it was of the covers of booklets, and it read it as a poster. So of course it said two posters of XYZ, and the descriptions were pretty good. It wasn't terrible, but they weren't posters. They were booklets, and it was the cover of the booklet. So I had to clarify that. I had to make that edit. So here you have the same issue. It's going to throw out alt text at your audience and you don't know what that is and it's making an error. And this is more egregious as an error than the other image, but this is totally wrong. And that can confuse your audience. And what are the things that it actually made better for the audience? Here you have image text over images, which in general isn't a great thing to do for low vision. And so people were unable to discern that there was even text on these images because their vision was too low to see the contrast between the text and the image. There was an attempt to put some like a gradient black underneath the text to make it better, but it didn't really help. So many people actually skipped over these they look like they might be links to something, but they were just skipped over because they couldn't read that there was text on the image. So with the overlay on, what the overlay did was add more black, create more contrast so that it looks more like white on black text, in which case it was visible. However, it created a new problem in that the image wasn't very clear anymore. So it was a trade-off. It made the text better to be seen. It did improve the contrast of the text, but it made the image less discernible. So that was one of the improvements. There were still issues with the way it improved it. And then in this case, there's text that was a download link. And so in the first, without the overlay, all the person was told is that it's a link and it's a download link. Doesn't really say what it's downloading for you, so you may not want to download it because you don't know what it is. So the overlay helped this situation by adding clarity. So it said this link opens an image download. So they have a better idea of understanding what clicking the link is going to do, and that could help. So it improved the clarity in this case. But some people complained about it. Some people felt it added things they didn't want. It was too much information. Sometimes it's hard with different users. So some users thought it was helpful. Other users thought it was unhelpful because it added too much words for them to listen to when they're trying to like go through the website. It added too much words. So it was interesting that some users liked it and some didn't. So the question was, so did use of the overlays help? Did the improvements that using the overlays made make it okay to use them? And the answer would be no based on their experience because it was helping to prioritize some users' experience over others. And for others, the experience was worse. So that it really didn't help the situation to use the overlay in general. And then the second theme that she wanted to touch on with her study was nothing about us without us, meaning that one of the problems with the creation of these overlays is in general with the design and development of the overlays, many people with disabilities were not included in the design development process. So if you don't include them in your process, you're going to create a product that really may not help people, may not help the target audience. So there's a concern that during the development of these overlay products that they really didn't involve people with visual disabilities enough to consider their needs. And I think that's one of the issues that happened when, of course, the National Federation of the Blind came out to talk about how they were concerned about accessibility when their product was becoming very popular, and you're seeing it on many important websites, banking websites, whatnot, and whatever. But it wasn't really working well for people with visual disabilities. Like they weren't considered. And it made their experience like trying to do things that you really need to be able to do impossible. And because the design and development of the overlays didn't include them at the time. Now, I recently spoke with an accessibility spokesperson, and since that experience, they have been interacting a little bit more with the blind community and trying to improve their products. So the message was heard somewhat, where they are now trying to work more with people with visual impairments to help improve their product. Now, whether they've improved their product enough, I think that remains to be seen, but at least now they're included, which wasn't the case when these products were being first designed and implemented. And of the 21 participants, actually 36% of them did not even realize there was an overlay on the site. So a third of the participants didn't even see the overlay. So if this overlay is on your website to help people with disabilities use your website better, the first number one thing is that they need to know it's there. And a third of users are not even seeing it. And so they cannot activate it, they cannot do anything with it. So they're just not seeing it. And again, in the paper, she had this graphic that shows, and it was something that happened with all of them. So it's not one worse than the other. All of them had a percentage of people that didn't detect the overlay on a site. And so by the time you get here, 39 who actually were able to see the thing, and then not all of them interacted with it, and then only some of them were able to actually activate it and get it to work. So there's still work that needs to be done once you actually get them to actually see the overlay on the website, is that you need to make it so that they can actually use it. And that's still a problem here. You can see that not everybody was able to get it to work, even when they found it. So here it looked like user way was slightly better than the other two in terms of being able to be detected. And then once there were one case of user way that an attempt to activate that was unsuccessful, in the same way with one attempted to activate audio line was unsuccessful. And one of the issues is the reason that it wasn't seen was that a lot of people didn't even recognize this symbol. Now, this study is being used in Germany. Is this really a universal symbol for accessibility? Apparently, it isn't. So it wasn't something that they recognized. They probably came across it. The screenreader probably said it was a stick figure, and it just means stick figure. It doesn't mean overlay. So they didn't know what it was, and they just ignored it. So that's something that needs clarification for people. They need something that more clearly explains to them that this symbol means it's an overlay. And then for the people that actually activated it, what happens is you pull up a menu and then you're supposed to select your profile and it'll adjust the website according to your profile. And this again was an area of confusion because it kinds of divides people with disabilities into different types of people with disabilities. So you have the motor impaired, the color blind, the visually impaired, people with seizures, the blind, people with dyslexia, cognitive or learning issues, and ADHD. So these are the different profiles that are presented, at least in this particular overlay, but they're all very similar and they do similar things. So if somebody has multiple impairments, they see this, they're like, I don't know which one is best for me to choose. It's not really clear to them. If they have, if they're colorblind and they also have ADD, then which is the one that they should click on? So they don't know. It's not clear. So they never interacted with this before. This is the first time they're interacting. This is not actually a clear thing for them to interact with. They don't know what to do. So that was interesting feedback on this. So if they were unclear which profile to click, they probably just decided not to do it, not to pick anything, right? So that's often if you can't make a decision about something, you often just decide not to use the thing. So that was one of the concerns about the terminology and using it. And one of the participants said that because this created another barrier for them, like they have to figure out, oh, there's this thing on the website. Now I have to figure out how to use the thing. He was like, I have to be really interested in the website itself to decide that I'm going to spend time learning how to interact with this software that's on top of the website. He would have to be really interested in the content of the website to take the time to figure this out. And if it wasn't that worthwhile to him to spend time trying to figure out how to use the accessibility overlay, he's probably just not gonna look at the website. And this is just a graphic that just shows how user experience fits in. User experience encompasses the interaction with the website, but it also encompasses the before they interact and after they interact. And then the interaction itself is the usability. Is it effective? Can they use it efficiently? Do they have a satisfactory experience? Can they achieve their goals of what they intended to do when they got to the website? And this is the final results of the AUS survey, the accessibility, the usability survey. So if this is up here is a good user experience to the best imaginable user experience, this is where you want to be, this purple area here. That's where you want your website to be. Now, the website itself, and this is average, the website itself was here, but ranked as an average website, not particularly good or great experience for most people, whether they have disabilities or not. So it ranked here. And this was how the experience was for the people that participated. So for the people that didn't detect the overlay, so essentially didn't use an overlay, they had a slightly above average experience completing the tasks. But for people who detected it, interacted with it, and activated it, their user experience actually got worse. So that wasn't really a great endorsement of the overlays being on the websites. So they had a worse time using the website using the overlays. And again, I think it would be good to really pay more attention to her, like go into her paper more closely, where you study exactly what they saw. So just to show like that she created this graphic, it's easier for her keynote presentation, but it's always useful to go behind and look at things more closely. So the average AUS was about 57. And then this is I would say, even though these numbers do change slightly, it's probably within the error. So it's basically an unchanged experience in general. But you're like averaging the people who didn't use it, who detected it, but didn't necessarily use it, the people that actually interacted with it, and then the people that tried to activate it. But if you look at the activation, Like user way activation to no overlay is about the same. So it didn't really change their experience. Accessibility, it's a little bit worse. And then audio UI seemed to be worse. And then they were also asked to give a user experience score on a Likert scale, so 1 to 5, where 5 is the best and one is bad. So again, if you just looked at everything averaged out without an overlay, the experience on the website's a 3. It's not a great website. With user way, it's still a 3. With accessibility, it's still a 3, and with audio eye, it's still a 3. Although if you look at the activation of the actual overlay over here, userway actually maybe slightly better, accessibility slightly worse, and audio eye slightly worse. So that's really what she found with that. And then in terms of being able to complete the tasks, so they would, this is the aggregate for user way, and this is with user way on, this is with user way off. So accessibility on and off. So you have to look at this, compare how it was with it on, how it was with it off, and then look at it against how it was without an overlay at all. So without an overlay, there were people that didn't fully complete the tasks, were able to partially complete them, and then people that completely abandoned it because it just frustrated them. So if you look at people that got so frustrated they abandoned trying to complete the task, the overlays did actually reduce that issue. Like they didn't, less people abandoned trying to complete the task with the overlays there. So that's a slightly positive thing there. And then if they went into like interviews of what did people really think about this, and one person didn't really have like high hopes that the overlay would work just because websites are so different that it would be impossible to create something that would work with all websites. So this participant felt like it would be difficult to create a product that would work on all websites to make the experience better. So this person had low opinion that would even work. And then going into her paper again, a majority of people felt that they just preferred using their system and browser settings that they had without the overlay. Like they preferred it, over 50% preferred just doing it how they'd been doing it with their browser and system settings, as opposed to using the overlay. And in her keynote, she presented this data in a different way. Again, a majority of people preferred it with just using their browser and however they have their screen reader device set. 2 people didn't have a comment. 1 person was unsure. And then some people thought they had a better experience with the overlay. And 1 person preferred the overlay. And if you look at the comments that they received after interviewing everybody, these were some of the things that were said about the overlays. So participant 10 said, after a brief investigation, I haven't found anything suitable for me when I surf the web. Doesn't want to spend half an hour going through a list of what they can activate. Personally, I would prefer to use the system and browser options because it is simply a global setting and it does not need to be readjusted from website to website. So this is interesting because most of these people have their access reader already calibrated to their system and browser in a certain way. So for them to use the accessibility overlay, they have to make adjustments to their settings. And it's generally because the experience isn't worth it. Maybe there's slightly a change in experience, but it's not an experience that's worth it enough for them to have to change the settings of their system from website to website. So they would really need an experience that is so much better with the overlay that they would go to the trouble of doing all that. So that's interesting to know. And again, this person again sets their settings already to a way that works for them. So for them to, again, change the settings is a lot of trouble. So they would probably not want to use anything that requires them to adjust their settings in any way. So this person says, like, if they're using their own computer, they probably wouldn't bother. But if they're using somebody's else's computer, they're in a hotel or using like a computer that's maybe a public computer, then maybe the accessibility would help them. But if they've already, they're already using their own computer with their settings and it's calibrated, it's probably not going to be worth it to them to do it on their own computer. So they think the accessibility overlay may help in a situation where they're not using their own personal system. It might be better than nothing, but they felt it wasn't very intuitive, like it would have to be improved. So it's more easy to use out of the box as opposed to getting confused by settings. And then this person, if they're trying to like look at something quickly, going through the trouble of going through the overlay would be too complicated and difficult for them to bother. And the person that actually thought that they would use overlays or were positive about it, interestingly enough, they had a positive thing to say about the overlays, but the participant was one of the people that never detected it on any of the websites. So the person that had a positive opinion of them never actually used it. So that's interesting. So they said, I would like it if the accessibility overlay was on every website. That would help. I can imagine that. I can make settings quickly on other devices. You're not necessarily always in the same device. They didn't really use the website to have or the overlay to have a positive opinion of it, but for it to be positive, like what they're saying is that the accessibility overlay needs to be on everything and it needs to have settings that are easy and universal. Otherwise, it's probably going to be difficult. And the person who was unsure, again, they said it depended on how much energy they had and what they were doing for the rest of the day. Because if it's going to take them a lot of effort to figure out how to use the overlay, then it's not worth it to them. They don't have the energy, they don't feel like it. And when they try to use one, they get really disappointed when it doesn't work well. So it needs to be something that works intuitively, that works well. And that's not really what they found with using them. Again, in order to make this better, you need to have more people with impairments incorporated into the design, development, and decision process. And the 18th participant said, maybe I'm just not very experienced, but then accessibility overlays have to be so good that I can use them intuitively and don't have to take an extra course just to be able to use them. And the third theme that went through her talk was that the debate about accessibility overlays should not only exist in a vacuum. So in general, what they found, people were fairly negative about the overlays and their experience, but at the end of it, they actually had a positive view of the overlays. And she said that she thought that like they're still hopeful. They're still hopeful that there will be a technological solution to help them in the future. So even though this isn't quite there yet, they want to see more done to make it more intuitive, more easy to activate, more universal that would work with any system and not require individualized settings for every website that is come across. Because they want to see they have a desire to explore new solutions, they have a desire to have better access. So that's why she felt even though they in general didn't have that great of an experience, there was a lot of them were still hopeful about the idea of an overlay. And she just talked about that there's different ways to look at the conversation about accessibility. And the ways that you have here are that there's a legal, people are concerned about following the law and being compliant and not getting sued. People are concerned about digital accessibility, that the content on websites is available to any user. Digital divide has to do with access to technology. So there's always going to be some people that have a better experience because they have access to technology that they need, while there's people that don't. And the social construction of disability discourse. And the end goal or end of her talk, she was talking about is the responsibility of society to ensure that the internet and the web are accessible. And while there may be a general desire for a more equal and fair society, the deeper social and cultural structures that contribute to inequality are often overlooked. And if you are interested in her in learning more about what she does, she is on Mastodon, Twitter, LinkedIn. She has the website. You can email her. And these were some of the websites she was recommending. I didn't get to look at all of them. I did look at Cat Report because I didn't know what that was. But this is something to explore further. But it scan websites for errors and then generate reports. The only issue is that the demonstrations are held in German and in English. And I think the next English presentation is end of June.
Hmm.
And then after that, July. So they're not all the time. You have to look at the schedule that they're having, and then because there's no demo on the website, you have to watch one of their demos to figure out how the product works. So I think I can't really attend at the end of June, but I'm going to see if I can try to attend one of the July sessions to see how it works and what kinds of reports it generates. So that's the end of this presentation. I thought it was an interesting study. I think it probably needs to be repeated, obviously. You want to see if the results she found are more universal with another group of people. And then one of the issues with actually, I forgot to mention earlier, was the activation interaction. One of the reasons that they failed to activate could have been because of a language barrier, because some of the overlays, even though the language would change on the button to German, on the screen reader, it would just speak in English. And if the person didn't understand English, then they wouldn't use it. So it'd be interesting to do something similar with a group who all understood English to see if they got better results. Because the language barrier could have been the issue and not the actual overlay technology.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I think that the part you talked about with the icon too is interesting too, that these overlay companies are just using this. Oh yeah, everybody knows what that is, but is it really a standard? And I've looked at them. Oh, this is probably the standard I should be using for accessibility because this seems to be the common thing. But apparently, at least from this study, people don't really know that.
Yeah, again, maybe it's just something that's recognized in America.
Yeah,
It's not something that's global.
yeah,
So is there a global symbol for disability or accessibility that could be used that
yeah.
people recognize? So that
Because
was
even go ahead. I'm sorry.
that was interesting too, like the fact that they didn't know what it was when they saw it.
Yeah, yeah. Because the handicap parking symbol that has evolved recently, or they've modernized it. So it's the original wheelchair was didn't have any motion to it basically, but the new one is tilted, so it almost looks like the wheelchair is moving. If you've noticed that, and there's some newer, like when parking lots are redone out here, I've noticed that where they're using the new symbol versus the old one, like from the 90s.
So some of these things we think are universal are not.
Yeah, yeah, yes. I don't know if that filters into this accessibility symbol too, because I was playing with that as some graphics and things and icon logo ideas, and it's oh yeah, that's the standard. Maybe it isn't.
Yeah, most of them use that stick figure as
Yeah,
the
I've seen that in a lot of places, but
you can change it because some of them allow you to do a custom thing. But then it's if you customize it, is it something that people are going to know what it is?
and then the customization, the profiles was interesting too, I thought.
Yeah, the profiles was interesting. I guess I didn't think of it that way, but I could see how people might be confused by it now that I look at it.
Being forced to choose is the tricky one because it's almost like that earlier in the presentation you were talking about the prioritizing number one, prioritizing some user's experience over the deterioration of others. You're almost having to do that on a personal level while you're prioritizing, say, the ADD over the color
Yeah.
discernment or something. And you can't do both. You have to pick one. So then the color side of things is going to deteriorate. So that's interesting too.
First time I saw overlays, I would click on all the buttons to see what they do.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
I'm sure people who have visual impairments have been in a situation where they've clicked on something and it's done something really bad. You don't want to take a chance, right? Because
Yeah. And how intuitive is it to change it back too? If once you did this to your overlay, you have to reload the page or something. Yeah, that's wow. So what I take from this is that overlays are still not ready for prime time.
yeah, yeah. But it's interesting how the community, even though they didn't seem to have a great experience reading their comments, they still are looking for that solution. They have hope that it might be made better in the future.
Yeah, it is a step in the right direction. If it's a base to improve and we can figure out everything that's wrong with it,
Yeah.
then maybe some better things. It's better than again, I don't know if it's better than not having anything at all, but at least that the effort is there.
Yeah.
Show something. Of course, they're just trying to make money too, but that's probably part of the problem right there. So just buy this. Goes back to the marketing we talked about. I think with the accessibility lawsuit, right? It's all this will solve all your problems, and it doesn't.
All right. I think, yeah, that was a failing, just not, and it's not just the one company, but all, just not involving enough people with visual impairments in the design process. I think that the overlays can work, can do a lot of good things for people with other kinds of impairments. The spokesperson for, in many of the talks for accessibility, I think he's paralyzed from the neck down. And so he uses a joystick that he manipulates with his chin and mouth. And he uses the on-screen keyboard. And so for him, he finds using accessibility very helpful because it puts up the keyboard and he can use his joystick to move through the website real easily. So for him and his type of impairment, it has actually improved his experience. So that's why he's a spokesperson.
Yeah,
But really, the failing that the overlays have been dealing with people with visual impairments.
right.
So they need to spend more time with people with visual impairments and figure out how they use websites to figure out how to make the use of the website better for them without making it a worse experience for other people too.
Yeah, that's the real challenge in there too. Exactly. And then that profile, that user you're talking about, spokesperson, their profile is set for the physical impairments primarily, I imagine too.
Yeah.
Yeah, interesting. I think the challenge in this too, like you touched on at the end, is this one size fits all type of mentality. It's just and some of the participants were talking about how can one piece of software do all this for all the different kinds of websites that are out there. So interesting. Yeah, definitely some good food for thought. I appreciate it.
Yeah, so it was an interesting. I came across it just recently, so then I think more people will be probably talking about it. So just and it's definitely probably worthwhile to spend more time with a full paper. It's all online. So if you go to
Yeah.
this, I can put it in the chat. If you go to this website, you
Okay.
can download the PDF. You can get the key. So the keynote is on YouTube. And again, it's in German. It actually took me a while to, when you do settings, I think you have to turn on the subtitles and then you have to do it again, I think, to make it auto translate.
Okay.
And then the subtitles will become English. Um, so that's how I watched her talk and she makes her slides available. So you can look at the slides that she provided. You can go through the way she presented her work. And then there was also a podcast episode, although I did not listen to it. I wasn't sure if this is something you can auto translate, so that's why I didn't spend a huge amount of time with it.
There's probably something out there that can do
There's
it,
probably
but
something that can do it. So that was, she had a podcast. So, but you can read the whole paper. She has her whole thesis here. And actually, I think one of the reasons I wanted to go back through her paper more closely is she does do a good job also just talking about the history of things when you're explaining the whole problem. It's everything is citations and prior research. Like it would be interesting to go look at some of the other studies that she referenced on similar studies of hers.
Yeah, and the
One
fact
of
that
the reasons, actually, this is one of the reasons Accessibility fared worse than the other two is because of ARIA, putting too much ARIA. Because you're only supposed to use ARIA if HTML can't do it. And so it isn't. So what Accessibility did was use ARIA too much when there is a solution, an HTML solution.
oh, okay, yeah.
So that was one of the things. There's just more details like in her paper, and we couldn't go over it in the time either. But there's more details in her full paper about everything. And again, like you can, she explains why she's using like the AUS survey. There's another survey that's there that she's explaining why. And then the manual testing, there wasn't enough time to really go over this, but they did also do manual testing on the website so that what are the manual issues?
It seems very thorough. I
As
really
a thesis paper.